So why don't you just take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment, let your consciousness just soften and come into a place inside of you where the I am presence is waiting for you. But it's just a part of who you are. And you can feel that part of you that is saying yes to all these beautiful teachings today, all these amazing channelings today, all this community together, this family. Take another breath. And let that presence, that I am, just resonate within you. And feel all the things that the I am represents. I am divine, I am sacred, I am source, I am that I am wisdom. And take another breath. And let that energy of that breath circulate throughout your being, and that I am in your heart, in your soul, in the sacred vessel of your body. And we give our I am attention and gratitude to the wisdom and messages from Kryon.
Greetings, dear ones. I'm Kryon of Magnetic Service. What follows is new, and it will be seen as controversial as always. The controversy is from those who have learned a certain thing a certain way, and whatever that thing is based upon a culture that they understand that is linear. One of the hardest things that any human being can do is to get out of the box that they were born in, a box which makes sense. It makes sense because it's the way things work. It makes sense because that's how you were trained. It makes sense because that's what your loved ones said. It makes sense because as you learned certain things, including those things were spiritual and metaphysical, that's the way it worked. And now I come along and give you a whole different perspective. And before I even do it, I tell you this. It's a new perspective, dear ones, because the energy of this planet is starting to support the understanding of it. There will be those of you who will nod your heads because now it makes sense, as opposed to not making sense, but simply accepting it. It's the minutia that helps to understand it, and yet it brings up something that is completely different, so different that you shake your head. You shake your head and you say, I don't understand how this works. Multidimensional things, dear ones, that are completely and totally beyond the dimension you live in are odd and strange. You can't understand multidimensional life that might exist in ways that do not conform to your definition of life, because all you have is biology. How do you feel about light? Does light have life? And you will say, well, it doesn't seem to reproduce, it doesn't seem to... You tick off the things that does not make sense, do not make sense in your definition, and yet light changes if you're around. Light changes if you observe it. That is almost a cause and effect relationship to human consciousness and light. So, where are you going to go with that? Light is a multidimensional energy that actually can respond to human consciousness. So in that, it starts to bring up other questions. What's alive? What's not alive? What is your definition of life? I give you that only because what comes next is extremely complex. Again, we open the door to the discussion that is so beautiful about the human soul. The human soul is not anything like what you were told. Even if you follow the Kryon messages, I just give you surface information, summary information about the complexity, the beauty, the enormity, the magnificence of your soul. You use the word so simply. On a ship, reports how many souls are on board. It's a reference to how many human beings, because that's how you see it. There's a human, each human has a soul. Now then you turn to spiritual teaching and you ask, what is a soul and how it works? And you will hear many descriptions, but most of them linear. You have a soul, it is with you for life. That soul existed before you came. You take that soul, you come into the world. You make the choices you make, the soul is with you. You leave, the soul goes on to the other side of the veil. The soul comes back in again. Now that is a reincarnated soul. Not all believe that. Many believe the soul is just here for a while and it goes away. And it never comes back. So different are the attitudes and ideas. The original spiritual systems of this planet, the very, very original, saw the soul as reincarnating constantly. Those systems also saw the energy of what we would call karma today. Karma, that being the expression of the energies of life before yours, that you would carry into this life, that would have an energy that would have to be dealt with. That energy to a Hindu is primary. You will go to all lengths to experience nirvana, which is a cleansing of your karma. And so all of these principles were original principles. They are the most intuitive ones you can find on this planet to what the core truth is. Today, the soul becomes linear, and the information about it, you wouldn't believe how simple it either is or isn't. What happens when you die? Well, the soul goes away. I have sat in front of you many times, and I have given you information about soul splitting. I've asked you to even examine what is your higher self. It is a higher portion of your soul. Where is it? And then I tell you there is no such thing as where when it comes to multidimensionality. Location itself is a linear idea, dear ones. And if I tell you that the soul is everywhere all the time in all parts of the galaxy, because it is attached to the creative source, which is multidimensional and is everywhere all the time in the galaxy, you may start to understand, but that's you, your soul. It's not local. It doesn't simply come in with you. Dear ones, it's still around the galaxy. That's hard, isn't it? Wait a minute, Kryon. You mean my soul is not completely in my body? You got it. How could you have a higher self and it all would be in your body? The higher self must be somewhere else. Higher. Then you start to realize there is an element of splitting. Now that word is wrong, because even splitting is an absolute linear concept. You have one thing and out comes the knife and you have two. That's splitting. That is not the way of it. It's the only concept I can use. You don't have a word that is an amalgamation, a confluence of sharing one soul with maybe a million. It's not in that which I will call your understanding. It just isn't there. So what comes next is even more difficult. All of that to say, I would like to define today the walk-in. I've never done this. In the channel that we gave a moment ago, we sat next to the teacher, Marilyn. And when she channels, dear ones, she closes her eyes and then opens them, and she's someone else. All of this took place after an experience that she had called the walk-in. It's been well documented in her life and what she describes, and in that she describes, it conforms to what metaphysics describes is a walk-in. And everything I'm going to tell you right now doesn't make sense to that. You linearize everything. Let's talk about a walk-in and how it's supposed to work in its basic form. Also, when it starts to work, how often, the most common, but it goes like this. You're minding your own business with your own soul. And then because of something, which we'll describe, another soul walks in to your life, and you become so different that you don't even recognize that which was before. It is so startlingly different, as was the case with Marilyn, the teacher, that even her son asked the question, "What have you done with my mother?" That is how profound the shift and the change is. And to a human being, there's only one answer. You shifted souls. So the soul you were born with goes away somehow, or stays in the back seat somehow. Another soul comes in somehow, and that is then who you get. It's called a walk-in. So before we even discuss any more of the actuality and the reality of what might be taking place here, before we go there, I want to talk about when it often happens. This plays into what I'm going to tell you. It's a beautiful story, and there are those in this room who have experienced it. It is common to humans to go into an emergency situation, whether it's an accident, a hospital, home, where they will have what is called a near-death experience. Even that is mislabeled. Your definition of death is very clear scientifically. Many have died several times on the operating table. That all comes together in what metaphysicians have called an NDE, near-death experience. So we'll call them an NDE. If you talk to someone who has had an NDE, there are varying stories. Interestingly enough, they're not always positive. It has to do with the consciousness of the one that has had the experience. Let us talk about those who have had the experience and have come out changed. What happens during a near-death experience? First of all, the idea that you died is preposterous. You only died clinically. You'd know if you were dead. But you come close when there is even a beginning inkling of a shutdown of systems that are vital for life. When you stop breathing, when your heart stops, when the systems that are supposed to function because of oxygenation don't have oxygen. All of these signal the brain. The brain does something you don't ever know. It has a program for this. when it starts to realize that death is imminent, I want to tell you something. All of you have a safety valve. It's a consciousness of benevolence that comes over you to protect you from what you've been told is the horror of death. And it starts giving you some wonderful feelings of benevolence and light that you'll never forget. It's common almost to all of those who experience positive NDEs. They go into a tunnel perhaps, or they will see the light perhaps, or they'll feel the love of God perhaps, and they're not afraid at all.